The world often forgot about Lily. She was a wisp of a girl, all sharp angles and wide, solemn eyes, adrift in a sea of bustling indifference. Her days were a quiet testament to resilience, a solitary dance with the fading edges of hope. Her home, a small, weather-beaten house on the forgotten side of the tracks, sagged with the weight of years and unpaid bills. Its porch groaned a weary welcome, its paint peeled like sunburnt skin, and the garden, once a riot of color, now surrendered to tenacious weeds. Inside, the air hung heavy with the scent of old wood and unspoken worries. Lily's grandmother, a woman whose spirit was as fragile as the lace doilies she still cherished, moved through their sparse rooms with the slow, deliberate grace of someone conserving their last embers of energy. A persistent cough rattled in her chest, a constant, unwelcome guest. The medical bills, crisp white envelopes arriving with relentless regularity, piled up on the chipped kitchen table, each one a fresh stab of dread. The old woman tried to hide them, but Lily, with the keen perception of a child forced to grow up too fast, saw everything. She knew the tremor in her grandmother's hands, the distant look in her eyes that spoke of a future growing dimmer by the day. At school, Lily was a ghost in the hallways, her worn clothes and quiet demeanor rendering her almost invisible. Other children, bright and boisterous, moved through their days with an easy confidence Lily could only observe from the periphery. Lunchtime was a particularly lonely ritual. Her small, brown paper bag rarely held the vibrant, appealing snacks of her classmates. Usually, it was a single carefully wrapped sandwich, often just peanut butter, sometimes even less, and a bruised apple, sustenance stretched thin to last the entire week. Hunger was a familiar companion, a dull ache that hummed beneath her ribs, a constant reminder of their precarious existence. Yet, Lily never complained. She carried her burdens with a quiet strength, an old soul trapped in a young body, her kindness a fragile, flickering flame against the encroaching shadows. She was a forgotten melody in a cacophony of noise, an unseen good soul navigating a world that seemed determined to overlook her. One biting afternoon, as the wind whipped through the desolate streets and threatened to tear the last leaves from their branches, Lily walked home from school, her small frame hunched against the cold. The chill seeped through her thin coat, a relentless adversary. Her stomach rumbled, a hollow echo in the quiet street. She clutched her worn backpack, its contents light, to her chest. As she neared the outskirts of town, where the asphalt surrendered to cracked pavement and then to gravel, a dark, hulking shape loomed by the side of the road. It was a motorcycle, a beast of chrome and steel, its engine silent, its presence stark against the muted landscape. Next to it, leaning heavily against a lamppost, was a man. He was a figure born of shadows and hard edges. Leather, scarred and weathered, encased his broad frame, adorned with patches and intricate tattoos that snaked up his arms and disappeared beneath the collar of his jacket. A heavy, dark beard framed a face etched with the harsh lines of countless roads and untold stories. His eyes, though partially obscured by the brim of a worn baseball cap, seemed to hold a weary resignation, a profound weariness that even Lily, in her innocence, recognized as a form of suffering. He looked formidable, dangerous even, a creature of the night momentarily caught in the pale afternoon light. Lily's heart gave a sudden, frightened lurch. Every instinct screamed at her to cross the street, to quicken her pace, to become even more invisible than usual. The man was everything her grandmother had warned her about, a stranger with an intimidating aura that promised trouble. But then, a gust of wind tore through the street, and she saw it. A subtle tremor in his hand as he tried to warm it, a slight shiver that ran through his imposing frame. His gaze was fixed on the distant horizon, a silent plea for warmth, for sustenance. He was stranded, vulnerable, and utterly alone. The fear that had tightened its icy grip around Lily's chest began to loosen, replaced by a familiar pang of empathy. She knew that feeling, the gnawing emptiness, the chill that seeped into the very bones. It was a language she understood intimately. Her grandmother's words, often spoken in hushed tones over weak tea, echoed in her mind. When you can help, Lilybug, you help. That's all there is to it. She hesitated, her small hand clutching the strap of her backpack tighter. The sandwich inside was her only guarantee against the hunger that would surely return later that night. It was a precious commodity, a meager shield against the vast, indifferent world. To give it away would mean a night of gnawing emptiness, a sacrifice she knew all too well. Yet, the man's silent plea, his raw vulnerability, resonated with a deeper truth within her. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Lily made her choice. She walked towards him, her small footsteps almost swallowed by the wind. The biker, lost in his own bleak thoughts, didn't notice her until she was almost beside him. He flinched, his head snapping up, his eyes, dark and wary, locking onto her. A flicker of surprise, then something akin to confusion, crossed his rugged face. "Excuse me, mister." Lily's voice was barely a whisper, thin and reedy against the wind. She held out her brown paper bag, her hand trembling slightly. "You look cold and hungry." The man stared at her, his expression unreadable. He looked from her small, outstretched hand to the humble bag, then back to her earnest, innocent eyes. He seemed to search for a trick, a hidden motive, but found only pure, unadulterated kindness. His gaze softened, a subtle shift in the hardened landscape of his face. He took the bag, his large, calloused fingers brushing against her small ones. The warmth of the sandwich, still slightly insulated from her body heat, was a small beacon in the cold. "Thank you, little one." His voice was a low rumble, rough around the edges, but surprisingly gentle. He didn't offer an explanation for his predicament, nor did he ask for her name. He simply accepted the gift, a silent acknowledgement of her unexpected generosity. He watched as she turned and continued her journey home, her small figure growing smaller with each step, disappearing into the gathering dusk. The simple act, the unexpected offering, had pierced through the armor he wore, leaving a warmth that transcended the meager sandwich. It was a small, quiet miracle on a desolate road. Lily's life, after the encounter, returned to its familiar rhythm of quiet struggle. The memory of the biker, a fleeting image of leather and weary eyes, faded into the background of her daily concerns. The hunger that night was a sharper pang, a more insistent ache, but she bore it with the same silent fortitude. The medical bills still arrived, their numbers growing larger, their demands more urgent. The old house still groaned under the weight of its disrepair, its roof a sieve against the winter rains, its heating system sputtering its last, dying breaths. The small act of kindness, born of an innocent heart, seemed to have done little to alter the harsh realities of her existence. It was a small, bright ember in a vast, dark night, beautiful but ultimately powerless against the encroaching cold. Yet, unbeknownst to Lily, the ember had not died. It had traveled, carried by the grateful biker, across miles of desolate highway, through the hum of powerful engines and the camaraderie of a brotherhood forged in steel and loyalty. The biker, a man named Silas, had ridden through the night, the warmth of the sandwich and the unwavering kindness of the small girl a constant companion against the chill. He had reached his destination, a sprawling, makeshift camp nestled deep in the forgotten hollows of the landscape, where hundreds of his brothers gathered. Around a crackling bonfire, under a sky studded with indifferent stars, Silas recounted the tale. His voice, usually gruff and laced with the cynicism of a man who had seen too much of the world's ugliness, was imbued with a quiet reverence. He spoke of the biting cold, the empty tank, the gnawing hunger, and then of the small, silent girl who had offered her last morsel without a second thought, without a shred of fear, without any expectation of reward. He described her worn coat, her earnest eyes, the trembling hand that held out the humble paper bag. He spoke of the profound shock, the unexpected grace of her gesture, a beacon in his moment of despair. The story, simple and pure, resonated deeply within the hardened hearts of the Brotherhood. These were men who lived by a fierce, unwritten code: loyalty, respect, and above all, the sacred debt of gratitude. A kindness extended to one of their own, especially in a moment of dire need, was a debt owed by all. It was not a matter of money, but of honor, a sacred trust. Whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into a low rumble of agreement. The narrative, passed from one grizzled face to another, grew in significance. The image of the small, vulnerable girl, sacrificing her sustenance for a formidable stranger, became a powerful symbol. She was an embodiment of pure, unadulterated compassion, a stark contrast to the often harsh and unforgiving world they inhabited. The Brotherhood, a collective force of raw power and unwavering loyalty, began to stir. A plan, silent and swift, began to take shape in the shadows, fueled by a profound sense of obligation and a fierce desire to honor the debt. The world might have forgotten Lily, but the Brotherhood, bound by a code older than law, remembered, and they would not forget. The next morning, the air still held the sharp bite of winter, but an unusual stillness hung over the small, forgotten town. Lily, bundled in her thin coat, walked to school as she always did, her head bowed against the wind, her thoughts lost in the quiet hum of her own existence. The world felt the same, heavy with its familiar burdens. Then a sound. At first, it was a distant thrum, a low, almost imperceptible vibration that seemed to emanate from the very ground beneath her feet. It was a sound that grew steadily, subtly at first, like the distant murmur of a storm gathering on the horizon. It pulled at the edges of her awareness, a faint tremor in the quiet morning. But the sound did not recede. It intensified, growing with an almost terrifying speed, morphing into a deep, guttural growl that vibrated through the very air. It was the synchronized roar of hundreds, perhaps even 1,000, powerful engines, a mechanical symphony of raw, untamed power. The ground began to tremble beneath Lily's feet, a rhythmic pulse that echoed in her chest. The windows of the old houses along the street rattled in their frames, a metallic shiver. Birds, startled by the escalating din, burst from the trees in panicked flight, scattering like dark confetti against the pale sky. Lily stopped, her breath catching in her throat. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with a sudden, primal fear. The sound was no longer distant. It was an overwhelming, all-encompassing force, a ground-shaking thunder that filled the entire world. It seemed to come from every direction at once, a relentless, deafening wave. And then she saw them. They appeared first as a dark, undulating mass on the horizon, a seemingly endless river of steel and leather flowing into the town. Hundreds, perhaps even 1,000, motorcycles, each a gleaming beast of chrome and power, moved with a terrifying, disciplined precision. They were an army on wheels, a relentless tide of dark shapes and flashing metal. Their engines a single, monstrous roar that drowned out all other sound. The air itself seemed to thicken with their presence, charged with an almost palpable energy. Lily's small heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Her mind, racing with childlike terror, struggled to comprehend the scale of what she was witnessing. This was not a few bikers. This was a legion, a force of nature descending upon their quiet, forgotten town. She stumbled backward, her legs suddenly weak, her small hands flying to her mouth to stifle a cry. A cold, icy dread seized her. This was her fault. This terrifying invasion, this apocalyptic procession, must be a consequence of her simple act of kindness. Had she somehow offended the man? Had she unknowingly brought danger to her doorstep? The innocent gesture now seemed like a terrible, irreversible mistake. She imagined angry faces, shouts, the destruction of her grandmother's fragile home. Her mind conjured images of chaos and fear, a punishment for an act she had believed to be good. The few other residents who had been out that morning reacted with similar, stark terror. Doors slammed shut with desperate urgency. Curtains twitched, then fell still, as frightened eyes peered from behind the safety of glass. A woman screamed, a high, piercing sound that was instantly swallowed by the overwhelming roar of the engines. The town, usually so indifferent to Lily's presence, now seemed to actively shrink away, leaving her utterly exposed, a solitary figure dwarfed by the approaching storm. She was alone, caught in the terrifying vortex of her own unintended making, certain that the kindness she had offered had somehow, irrevocably, led to this moment of overwhelming dread. The roar grew louder, closer, shaking her to her very core. It was the sound of judgment, the sound of consequence, and Lily, small and vulnerable, stood directly in its path. The leading edge of the massive biker formation reached the street in front of Lily's small, weathered house. The roar of the engines reached a deafening crescendo, a physical assault on the senses. Then, with a suddenness that stole the breath from the air, the sound began to die. One by one, then in perfect synchronized waves, the engines sputtered, coughed, and fell silent. The transition from apocalyptic thunder to an almost absolute stillness was jarring, disorienting. A heavy, palpable silence descended, thick and charged with unspoken tension. Hundreds of motorcycles, gleaming black and chrome, now lined the street, stretching back as far as Lily could see, a metallic river frozen in place. The air, still vibrating with the memory of the noise, was now filled only with the faint ticking of cooling engines and the distant, panicked cries of birds. From the head of the formation, a figure detached itself. It was the man Lily had helped, Silas. He moved with a quiet authority, his leather-clad form cutting a sharp silhouette against the pale morning sky. He walked towards Lily, his gaze fixed on her small, trembling figure. His face, usually a mask of rugged stoicism, held an unreadable intensity. Lily, frozen in terror, watched him approach. Every fiber of her being screamed to run, to hide, but her legs refused to obey. She braced herself for an angry word, a harsh accusation, the confirmation of her deepest fears. But then, as Silas reached a point directly in front of her, he performed an unexpected gesture. He stopped, stood tall, and then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he removed his helmet. His eyes, no longer wary, held a profound respect, a quiet reverence. And then, in a ripple that started with Silas and spread like wildfire through the hundreds of bikers arrayed behind him, every single helmet came off. The men, their faces etched with the stories of hard lives and countless miles, stood exposed, their eyes, a multitude of expressions, all fixed on Lily. Then, in a final, synchronized gesture that stole Lily's breath, every single biker bowed their head. It was a silent, powerful acknowledgement, a collective gesture of deference and honor. Silas, his helmet cradled in the crook of his arm, finally spoke, his voice a low, resonant rumble that carried in the sudden, profound silence. "Little one," he began, his gaze unwavering, "you saw me at my lowest. Stranded, freezing, hungry. You had nothing, yet you gave me everything." He paused, his eyes sweeping over the vast assembly of his brothers. "You showed me a kindness that night, a pure heart when the world was dark. You fed me when I had nothing. That debt, little one, is a sacred one. And tonight, we feed you. Forever." The words, spoken with such earnest conviction, shattered the last vestiges of Lily's terror. Her fear, so potent and overwhelming just moments before, dissolved like mist in the morning sun, replaced by a wave of disbelief, then awe, and finally a profound, overwhelming relief. Her small hands flew to her mouth, not to stifle a scream, but to muffle a sob that welled up from the deepest part of her being. Tears, hot and fast, streamed down her cheeks, washing away the fear and leaving behind a raw, aching gratitude. The world, which had seemed so dark and terrifying, had suddenly, miraculously, shifted. The army of rough angels, once a harbinger of doom, was, in fact, an answer to a prayer she hadn't even known she'd uttered. The silence, once heavy with dread, now hummed with a different kind of energy, a quiet reverence. Silas turned, his hands sweeping across the assembled brotherhood. "Brothers," he commanded, his voice ringing with authority, "you know the code. You know the debt. Let's honor it." And with that, the army of rough angels sprang into action, not with aggression, but with a synchronized, disciplined purpose that was breathtaking to behold. It was a sight that defied all expectations, a scene of organized chaos that quickly transformed into a symphony of constructive effort. Hundreds of men, each a formidable figure in leather and denim, moved with practiced efficiency. They were not merely bikers. They were an army of skilled tradesmen. Trucks, previously hidden further down the road, rumbled forward, laden with supplies. Lumber, gleaming new shingles, fresh paint, plumbing pipes, electrical wiring. An entire hardware store seemed to materialize on Lily Street. A team of men swarmed the old, ailing house. Within minutes, the groaning porch was being dismantled, replaced by sturdy, new wood. The peeling paint was scraped away, revealing the tired bones beneath. Ladders shot up to the leaky roof, and teams of men, moving with incredible speed, began to strip away the old, broken shingles, replacing them with a vibrant, new roof that promised warmth and protection. Other teams descended into the neglected garden, pulling weeds with practiced hands, preparing the soil for new life. Inside, another transformation began. Old, drafty windows were carefully removed, replaced by modern, insulated panes that would finally keep the biting cold at bay. A team of plumbers, their hands calloused but precise, began to tackle the ancient, sputtering heating system, replacing it with a brand-new, efficient unit. Electricians, their tools gleaming, rewired the house, bringing it into the modern age, ensuring warmth and light. Lily stood there, utterly overwhelmed, watching the impossible unfold before her eyes. Her grandmother, drawn by the commotion and the sudden, glorious silence, had emerged onto the newly reinforced porch, her frail hand clutching her chest, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelieving wonder. Silas approached her, his voice gentle. "Ma'am," he said, removing his cap, "your granddaughter gave me her last meal. Tonight, we give you a home." The old woman, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks, could only nod, speechless. As the day wore on, the transformation was staggering. The house, once a symbol of decay and neglect, began to glow with renewed life. A fresh coat of vibrant paint, a warm, inviting yellow, covered its tired exterior. The garden, meticulously cleared, now held the promise of spring bulbs. Inside, new appliances were installed in the kitchen, a gleaming refrigerator and a modern stove replacing the ancient, sputtering relics. New furniture, sturdy and comfortable, appeared as if by magic, replacing the worn, threadbare pieces that had served them for decades. Perhaps the most profound gift, however, was not just the physical repairs. As the day drew to a close, a group of bikers approached Lily, carrying a small, custom-built wheelchair. It was designed for her grandmother, lightweight and maneuverable, a stark contrast to the clunky, old one that had confined her to the house. It was a gift of freedom, a silent acknowledgement of the quiet suffering Lily had borne. The sheer scale of the generosity, the meticulous attention to every detail, was a testament to the depth of their gratitude. The medical bills, those crisp, white envelopes that had haunted Lily's grandmother, were gathered by Silas. With a flourish, he produced a thick wad of cash enough to cover them all, with a significant surplus. "No more worries, ma'am," he said, his voice firm. "You cared for one of our own. Now we care for yours." The surrounding community, initially paralyzed by fear, slowly began to emerge from their homes. They watched, their faces a mixture of astonishment and shame, as the dangerous bikers worked with tireless dedication, transforming Lily's house into a beacon of hope. Their prejudices, so deeply ingrained, shattered like glass. The whispers that had once condemned the bikers now spoke of awe and disbelief. Lily, once the overlooked, forgotten child, was now the center of a profound, public act of honor. She, who had been invisible, was now seen, revered, and celebrated. The kindness she had sown, small and humble, had blossomed into an overwhelming harvest of love and security. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the work was finished. The house, once a testament to neglect, now stood proud and vibrant, a symbol of renewed hope. The garden, meticulously tended, promised future blooms. The interior, warm and inviting, was a haven of comfort and security. Silas, his face now softened by satisfaction, approached Lily and her grandmother. "The debt is paid, little one," he said, his voice a low rumble. He extended his hand to Lily. In his palm rested a small, intricately carved wooden bird, its wings spread as if in flight. "This is for you," he explained, a reminder that even the smallest kindness can soar. He then turned to the grandmother. "And ma'am, our brothers will ensure your well-being. Consider yourselves part of our family now." With a final, respectful nod, Silas returned to his motorcycle. In a ripple that began with him and spread through the entire formation, every single biker started their engine, not with a roar, but with a soft, synchronized hum. Then, with a collective wave and a final, reverent salute, the army of rough angels began to move. They departed as they had arrived, a disciplined, awe-inspiring procession, their engines a soft, receding thunder that carried their message of honor and gratitude into the fading light. They left the town not as a threat, but as a legend, their passage leaving an indelible mark on the landscape and the hearts of those who witnessed it. As the last motorcycle disappeared over the horizon, a profound quiet settled over the street. Lily stood on her new porch, clutching the wooden bird, her heart overflowing. The house, once a source of quiet despair, now pulsed with warmth and light. Her grandmother, seated comfortably in her new wheelchair, her face radiant with a joy Lily hadn't seen in years, reached out and squeezed her hand. The next morning, Lily walked to school, but this time, the world felt different. Her steps were lighter, her head held a little higher. The hunger that had once been her constant companion was gone, replaced by the warmth of a full belly and the promise of a secure future. Her new backpack, a gift from the bikers, held not just a simple sandwich, but a thermos of hot soup, a fresh apple, and a small sweet pastry. She shared it with a classmate who had forgotten their lunch, a small, unconscious act of generosity that mirrored the one she had received. The small, carved bird, a symbol of the profound bond forged on that desolate road, sat on her nightstand, a constant reminder of the day the world had changed. Lily, once forgotten, now carried the knowledge that kindness, once given freely, always finds its way home, often in ways more magnificent and life-altering than one could ever imagine. It was a lesson etched onto her soul, a truth whispered by the wind and roared by 1,000 engines. That compassion, no matter how small, is never wasted. It is a seed, once planted, that can grow into an entire forest of hope, transforming not just one life, but an entire community.